You know that moment when a room full of people is laughing and you realize you're the joke? Yeah, that was me at my sister's wedding. 200 guests, crystal chandeliers, perfect setup, and her fiancé grabs the mic and calls me a pathetic single. Mom! Everybody laughed, even my own mother. I didn't react. I didn't say a word. But what none of them knew was that my 13-year-old daughter had been holding on to a secret for 3 weeks. And the second she stood up and walked toward that microphone, I knew. This wedding was about to fall apart in front of everyone. I wasn't supposed to stand out that night. And honestly, that was kind of the whole point. Because when you've spent most of your life being the extra in your own family, you learn how to shrink yourself without even thinking about it. So yeah, table 17 in the back corner of that fancy ballroom actually felt right for me, tucked away near the service door where waiters kept, slipping in and out carrying trays of champagne and those tiny appetizers nobody really eats but everyone pretends to love. And I sat there in a simple black dress. Nothing flashy, nothing that would draw attention, just me and my 13-year-old daughter. Lila sitting quietly while my younger sister Kayla had her big moment. The kind of moment she'd been dreaming about forever. The kind with crystal chandeliers glowing overhead, soft piano music floating through the air, and white roses everywhere like something straight out of a wedding magazine. And for a second, just a second, I told myself maybe tonight would be different. Maybe tonight nobody would take a shot at me. Maybe I could just exist without being the joke. But then Jason picked up the microphone and that tiny little hope disappeared real fast. Because Jason, Kayla's fiancé, the smooth-talking finance guy who always dressed like he walked out of a luxury, had this way of turning every room into his stage. And at first his speech sounded normal. You know, thanking guests, praising Kayla, saying all the right things with that practiced charm of his, the kind that feels just a little too perfect. Like he rehearsed it in the mirror and people were smiling, laughing, clinking glasses, completely eating it up, and I kept my head down, fingers folded in my lap, just counting seconds, waiting for it to be over, but then he paused, and I felt it before he even said anything. That shift in tone, that little smirk forming on his face. And he said, and shout out to Kayla's sister, Mia. And my stomach tightened because I knew exactly where this was going. And then he continued, who showed us all that sometimes life doesn't go as planned. And a few people chuckled, and I stayed still. Didn't react, didn't look up, because reacting would just make it worse. And then he added, but hey, being a single mom builds character, right? And that's when the whole room laughed. Not just polite laughter either. Real laughter. Like my life was actually funny to them. Like the years I spent rebuilding after my divorce were just some kind of punchline. And I could feel every single pair of eyes in that room, even though I refused to look up. And beside me, Lila's hand tightened around mine so hard it almost hurt, her fingers digging into my skin. And I knew right then she was trying to hold something back, something big. Because my daughter doesn't react like that unless something really matters. And Jason kept going like nothing happened, adding little comments, little digs wrapped in jokes, and the room just followed his lead, laughing, nodding, playing along, and I stayed quiet because I've learned silence is sometimes the only way to survive moments like that. But Lila isn't like me. She doesn't shrink. She doesn't stay quiet when something feels wrong. And suddenly I heard her chair scrape loudly against the floor, and my heart dropped because I knew what that meant. And before I could stop her, she was already standing, already walking toward the stage, and the entire room went silent in that heavy, uncomfortable way, where everyone knows something's about to happen, but no one knows what. And Jason laughed awkwardly, trying to keep control of the moment, saying something like, "Oh, what's this, future speech?" But Lila didn't smile, didn't hesitate. She just walked straight up to him, reached for the microphone, and took it right out of his hand like she belonged there and said, "Yeah, I actually have something to say." And you could feel the tension snap across the room, and Kayla half stood from her seat, looking confused, trying to calm things down. But Lila shook her head and said, "No, you should hear this." And I stood up, my chest tight, whispering for her to come back. But she didn't even look at me. She just stood there, calm and steady, looking straight at Jason and said, "You shouldn't be talking about my mom like that." And people started murmuring, shifting in their seats. And Jason tried to laugh it off, saying it was just a joke. But Lila didn't back down. She said, No, it's not. And then she pulled out her phone. And something about the way she did it made my stomach drop because I realized this wasn't just a reaction. This was something she'd been holding on to, something planned, and she said, "I didn't want to do this, but you kind of asked for it." And Kayla looked confused, asking what she was talking about. And Jason stepped forward, clearly starting to panic, but Lila kept going, explaining how 3 weeks ago she had borrowed my old tablet for school and how it was still connected to a shared cloud account. And my mind started racing because I suddenly understood where this was going. And Jason tried to stop her, reaching for the phone, but she stepped back, refusing to let him take it, and then she pressed play. And his voice filled the room, clear as day, saying, "Yeah, man, once the wedding's done, I'm in, her mom's loaded. I just gotta play nice for a bit." And the entire room froze, like time just stopped, and nobody moved, nobody breathed, and Kayla's face went completely pale. And Jason tried to grab the phone again. But Lila moved away, saying there was more, and then she played another recording. His voice again saying he wasn't planning to stay, that maybe a year or two and he'd be out with easy money. And that's when the gasps started, real reactions now, people whispering, shifting, looking at each other, and Jason tried to defend himself, saying it was taken out of context. But Lila didn't even argue, she just said, "Okay, here's the full context." And then suddenly the big screen behind them lit up with text messages, and I didn't even know how she managed to connect it. But there it was, message after message from someone saved as Ray with a heart emoji, talking about the wedding like it was some kind of plan, some kind of setup, and one message in particular hit like a punch. "Single mom, easy target. Nobody listens to her anyway." And I felt something inside me go completely still. Not even hurt anymore, just clear, like all the pieces finally made sense, and Kayla slowly turned to Jason, asking him to tell her it wasn't real. And he just stood there, unable to answer, because there was no answer that could fix this. And that silence said everything. And Kayla's voice broke as she asked if he'd been cheating on her, pointing at the screen, and he hesitated just long enough to confirm it. And then she ripped off her engagement ring and threw it at him, saying she was done. Just like that, no hesitation, no second chances, and the room erupted into chaos. People standing, whispering, pulling out their phones, pretending not to watch while watching everything. And my mother finally stood up, her face tight, eyes locked on me, accusing me of knowing, and I didn't answer because there was nothing to say. And she laughed. But it wasn't the same laugh from earlier. This one was sharp and uncomfortable, asking how I could let this happen. And I looked at her and said, "You laughed when he humiliated me." And that shut her up instantly. And Kayla walked off the stage without even looking at Jason, like he didn't exist anymore. And just like that, the wedding was over before it even started. And Jason tried to regain control, tried to explain, but nobody was listening anymore because once the truth comes out like that, there's no putting it back. And Lila walked back to our table, calm again, like she hadn't just blown up an entire wedding, sat down, took a sip of water, and I looked at her with shaking hands and asked if she was okay. And she nodded and said she just didn't want them laughing at me. And that hit harder than everything else. And I pulled her into a hug right there while everything around us fell apart. Guests leaving, staff whispering, my mother standing frozen, and Kayla somewhere outside dealing with the reality of what just happened. And after a moment I stood up, took Lila's hand, and we walked out, not rushed, not embarrassed, just done. Because sometimes being the one they try to hide in the corner just means you're the only one who isn't pretending. And that night, the truth didn't stay quiet. It didn't hide. It grabbed the mic and made sure everyone heard it.